people behind that song will direct our conversation for the next 10 or so minutes. We're going to meet two of those people for whom that is more than a song. It has been in many ways their lives. And a couple of times a year, most of us pause to remember those who have served in the Australian military uniform. Anzac Day is one of those times. And Remembrance Day, November 11. So indeed on Monday, we will pause to remember for Remembrance Day. But some among us remember the value and the cost of service each and every day, for they are the veterans, they are the loved ones of servicemen and servicewomen. Brett Hunt is one of those people. Brett's father, Frank, was a young serviceman in Vietnam in 1969 when he was involved in a mine incident that turned into the lyrics in that song we just heard. Frank Hunt was Frankie, referred to in that song of Red Gums. But it wasn't Frankie who kicked the mine. It was a young man from Wangi on the shores of Lake Macquarie, Lieutenant Peter Hines. However, Frankie was in Peter's platoon, and Frank's boy Brett, a writer and musician, has penned a play about all of this. And that play, called Vietnam Dusted Off, is to be performed in Peter Hines's hometown, along with surviving members of the platoon coming together to see this, to experience this. They are gathering. Well, joining us to talk about all of this is Brett Hunt and a surviving member of 3 Platoon A Company, Alf Lamb, who has made a long trek to be in Wangi for tonight. To both of you gentlemen, I say thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to meet you, Alfie.
That's right. You two haven't met yet.
No. I've heard about Alfie my whole life, but yeah, lovely to hear your voice, mate. Yeah.
This is incredible, incredible. Brett, when did you first hear about your dad's war service and make, indeed, the connection with that Red Gum song?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the play itself starts with a conversation on Dad's veranda, but I think my first memory was, you know, I won't ruin the start of the play, but it's very, very young. I'd say about 4 or 5 was when I was conscious that the fact that he served and was wounded, just simply because he was so sick at that time. Yeah, the song was such a huge thing, not just for our family, but for our whole community down in Berger. That, yeah, you know, you just get, I guess, curious as a child does get curious about their parents, about what the realities of all that was, you know. When
you heard the song, did you go, "Hey, Dad, is that you? Is that the Frankie he's talking about?"
Yeah, and he was always very clear. He said, "Well, it's about everyone who's ever served." That's always sort of said that. And he certainly said that early on. And in the public speaking of was lucky enough to see Dad speak at, he also mentioned that it's the universality of the song, which is its greatest strong point. But yeah, he said, "Yeah, that's me. I'm Frankie. I served in mixed platoon." I went, "Oh." The silence that followed that was quite remarkable, actually. I think we all sort of just topped up because I was 9. You know, and Kerry Ray was, 11, so we're just young kids. So we all just sort of, I remember there was a great silence. We all sort of hopped up and just went off into our rooms and I guess contemplated as children do, you know.
Yeah.
It was a profound moment, yeah.
How much was that incident? How much was that war there in your home as you grew up?
I think Dad was always, and Mum, because like Mum's father served in New Guinea and in Borneo and then on to Hiroshima, and her grandfather was he was in the first day of the Battle of the Somme, so she's also got all that sort of history as well. So it's kind of they were very protective of us in some ways. And they didn't always want to sort of like, well, Dad used to say this saying, "Your shoulders aren't wide enough for that load, son. I'll tell you when you're older."
Wow.
So there was a kind of, because Dad was also an advocate for veterans at the RSL and as part of the VVA, and there was a huge big part of our family. So, but they were very they protected us in a sense. They didn't want to sort of load us too early, I think, and I'm very grateful for that, yeah.
Now, as I mentioned, it wasn't your dad, it wasn't Frankie who kicked the mine the day mankind kicked the moon. It was a Wangi man, Peter Hines, a much-loved Wangi man. Someone who was there at that moment was Alf, And Alf Lamb, if I may ask, what do you recall about that moment?
That moment, it was about 9:45 on the 21st of July, and we'd been chasing some enemy, and we came across a well-used track, and the skipper, Peter Hines, we used to talk to him as the skipper. He was our skipper. He was our man in charge, and we come across the track, and the skipper designated to have an all-round defence so we could guard the track, and the idea was to send a patrol up, say, north and south, to see where the track led to. Anyway, it wasn't, the whole platoon had not formally linked up into an harbour position when the skipper clicked his fingers. I was about 15 to 20 metres away from him, and I seen what the direction was. So it was that the Yanks had landed on the moon. So in our bush, we never spoke. We used hand signals. So I stood up to pass the message along when there was a almighty bang, and what was the skipper, all I could see was a browny black dust. And after the dust settled, there was a bit of moaning and what have you going on, and the skipper was issuing orders. That was a mine explosion. Prod yourself into a fire position and link up to get a cleared area to medevac the wounded, a wounded count, and an ammunition count, because Johnny Goslet got a piece in the thigh and thought we were ambushed and were under fire. The skipper kept on issuing orders to us, and then about 2.5 minutes later, I got the message that the skipper had passed away, and I thought, God, he'd died a true soldier. He was a magnificent man. And that's part of what initially happened. But I'll go further for Brett. But when we prodded out and got clearance out into the dust off for the wounded, our sergeant, Jerry Newbury, he was badly wounded. His legs were shattered. And the Sarge said, righto, it was Mickey Storen. You go and take the head of the litter. A litter is a stretcher that's lowered down to the wounded because they couldn't land the choppers in case there was another mine explosion. The sergeant said, Lamb, you take the feet of Frankie, because the way he's looking at the moment, you won't have a chance to see him again. So that's what Mickey was at the head. I was at the bottom to stop it from swinging around. And that was the last time I seen of Frankie for 18 months, I suppose, until I seen him down at Heidelberg.
Goodness gracious. And we're talking about Brett's dad there, Frankie. Brett, many hide away these experiences and their impact on loved ones. And as your dad said, that extraordinary line, your shoulders aren't big enough yet, son, to carry this. But now you've written about it with Vietnam dusted off. Why have you done that?
I think there's the creative artist is essentially, there's a curiosity that sort of, you just have to follow something through when you just get an idea of something and you just got to follow it through. And obviously when it's something as personal as this, that's a very deep thing. But I'm also I'm sort of like a historical storyteller in education. So the historian's curiosity is ironically quite similar to the creatives. And I just had to sort of like try to understand it. Those perspectives, as well as the personal as a son. I also saw something in education that I thought was misrepresentative of what my understanding of the Vietnam experience was for the Australian troops. And it put a bit of fire in my belly that too often the Vietnam veterans were misrepresented through an American sort of perspective. And it seems that the Australian experience was quite different to the American one, and I really wanted to ensure that the son sort of gaze that unique Australian approach was commemorated and talked about honestly. And I also get the great honour to perform in front of young people in high schools whose parents have also served. And you won't believe this actually, Alfie, but I was out at St Gregory's in Campbelltown, and a young bloke comes up after the show, goes, "Yeah, my name's Ryan Baxter. I'm Phil Baxter's grandson." Now, Phil Baxter was one of the engineers who was at the mine incident. And that happened last Friday. You know, so
That's amazing.
those sort of events happen. Yeah, I mean, it's you can imagine what that sort of felt like for both of us. But it's really important, I think, for the school kids who don't have somebody who served, that they get a sort of an understanding of their schoolmates of what might be taking place in the family home and the adjustments of post-service. You know, yeah.
You're talking about like post-traumatic stress, etc.
Well, definitely post-traumatic stress, but also, like I've been performing in high schools for a very long time, and the reality is a lot of those kids, they had parents overseas as well during that period. And it's really important, I think, for communities to understand what's actually taking place for service families and for veterans, because that kind of understanding, I think, is imperative for the adjustments back to civilian life, if that's the case, or for what that continued service might mean for that family. And the only way we can do that is by being honest in our storytelling.
Yeah, and talking about that, the storytelling, to hear that story before that Alf told you that he was at the end of the stretcher there, when your dad, who was badly wounded, being carried away there.
Yeah.
What's it like to hear a story like that all these years later?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's never not a very profound thing, and Alfie, honestly, mate, that means an awful lot to hear it from you, and I just can't wait to have a beer with you tonight, mate, to be honest with you, after the show. But it's profound, isn't it? And it's like, I'm sure that there's Afghanistan veterans and their families listening to this interview, like completely understanding what Alfie was talking about.
Alf, you've travelled a long way to be part of this tonight. Where have you travelled from, and why have you travelled so far?
I've driven down from Caboolture, just north of Brisbane, and I try to attend as many of our get-togethers, A Company get-togethers, that I possibly can. We A Company fraternity has a reunion every 2 years somewhere in Australia. And when you see guys every 2 years, they don't seem to age all that much. But if you see them after 20 years, you can hardly recognise them. And that's the reason we have these get-togethers. Our numbers are getting shrinking every year, but we're still mates. We've still got that military love for each other, and that's how it is.
What are you expecting tonight, Alf, as you watch this play of Brett's, to see Brett bring back some of the perspectives and impressions he's had of that incident and its impact on his family's life?
Well, hopefully I don't cry too much. That's what I'll put it down to. I know I'm going to shed a tear right now, because actually the last time I seen Brett and his brothers and sisters was when he was about 18 months old. We called through Bega on our way back to... I used to live in a little place called Camperdown in Victoria. And, I seen the children then, but that was the last time I ever seen Brett.
And Brett,
there you go.
To stage this in Wanji, the home of Peter Hines, who the world lost in this incident in 1969, what's it mean to you?
I've never felt more honoured. I mean, I don't want to overblow it, but it really, I've never felt more honoured. I mean, you find yourself as a storyteller and songwriter in some pretty interesting situations, but when when a story connects itself to truth and it connects itself to a community and to real human beings, then I'd argue that's the whole point of it, isn't it? And hopefully I can, be part of that greater community up there in Wanji. And yeah, I can't. I've never looked forward to something more ever as a performer. This is a real highlight of my career. Yeah.
Well, saying chookers or break a leg doesn't seem enough, to use a theatrical term, with what you're about to perform and present, and for whom you're about to perform it tonight in Wanji. But that's all I've got, mate, is to say chookers to you, and to you.
Thanks, mate. Yeah.
Alf Lamb, thank you for your service. Thank you for all you've done, and thank you for who and what you are.
Thank you very much for having me on.
All right, mate. Enjoy Wanji, both of you.
Okay.
Thanks so much, mate.
The locals are kind, I assure you.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, see you, mate.
Bye.
There you go.
Bye, mate.
Brett Hunt, who will be performing his play Vietnam Dusted Off tonight in Wanji at the RSL. And in the audience will be Alf Lamb and his fellow brothers in arms, the surviving members of that platoon, 3 Platoon A Company, led by the skipper, to use Alf's word, a magnificent soldier, and by everyone's account in Wanji, a beautiful human being, Pete Hines, who kicked that mine July 21st, 1969, the day that mankind kicked the moon. It is 11:30 here on ABC Newcastle and ABC Upper Hunter. You're with Scott Bevan. Thanks so much for your company. Up next, a change of tone, a change